Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar from the Mary H. Weiser Food Allergy Research Center at the University of Michigan. This monthly series was created to help patients and their families cope with the social and emotional challenges of living with food allergy. As the clinical social worker on staff at the U of M Food Allergy Clinic, I work with our patients and families to provide tools and to help manage food allergy related anxiety and navigate the challenges from diagnosis through living independently at college and beyond. My role was established through a gift from the Mary H. Weiser Center, where advanced biomedical research into the origin and treatment of food allergy takes place every day. Founded only 5 years ago, the center was recently named a Discovery Center of Distinction by the advocacy group FAIR and added to its prestigious network of research institutions. Our clinic is only a handful nationwide that has a multidisciplinary team, including a food allergy counselor and dietitian dedicated to the work with our patients. Visit uofmfoodallergy.org to learn more about what we do at the center and our clinic. Today, I'm excited to have two guests with me to discuss their experiences of living with multiple food allergies and to share their strategies for parents and individuals themselves with food allergies. Daniel Kadden grew up in Long Island, New York. He has anaphylactic allergies to sesame seeds, tree nuts, and coconut. Daniel attended the University of Michigan, where he graduated with a BA in economics. While attending Michigan, Daniel sat on the board for the Weiser Center, where he focused on raising awareness and expanding resources for students and families of students with food allergies on campus. Upon graduation, he is the founding co-chair for the Rising Leaders Committee at FAIR. Haley Wise is from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, currently a senior at the University of Michigan, majoring in psychology, minoring in community action and social change. She hopes to pursue a career in social work. She also has multiple food allergies, was diagnosed at age 2. She recently joined the board of the Weiser Center as the student representative to help others who live with food allergies. Please contribute to our discussion today and join in with us by sending your questions using the Q&A function. We'll be answering them throughout the hour, and we always try to take as many questions as we can. We'll start with my pre-recorded interview with Haley, Weiser Center's new student representative. She offers tips on choosing a college, communicating about your food allergy with friends and people at work, getting over feeling embarrassed, dining out, dating, and managing alcohol use at college or as a young adult. Then we'll move right into my discussion with Daniel. Now, on to my segment with Haley. Haley, thank you so much for joining us today. I know our audience would love to hear a little bit about your experience with food allergies. So can we start by asking, what are your food allergies?
Yeah, so I'm allergic to peanuts, tree nuts, dairy, sesame, chickpeas, shellfish, and raw egg. Um, I didn't find out until I was 2 from an anaphylactic reaction originally. So I was at preschool and I had, I guess, like a chocolate covered peanut butter cup or something. And I immediately went into anaphylactic shock. And right after, I got allergy tested and found out about the rest of everything.
Wow, so really trial by fire. I'm sure that everybody's lives.
Yeah, we still talk about it.
Or I'm sure that day that your parents got that phone call, that really changed everybody's lives.
Yeah, we still talk about it.
So I know the parents that watch us are always really interested in knowing how they can be really effective parent coaches. So what was it like for you to transition to university and living on your own? I know they would love to hear things that went well and maybe some lessons you learned.
So before I came to college, I was really nervous about like being on my own and starting a new journey. But like I'm a senior now, and I think that college really made me really independent. One of the things that I looked into before choosing the University of Michigan was how they had a plan for kids with food allergies. It wasn't necessarily made out just for like allergies, it was also for like gluten intolerances and lactose intolerances and like kosher. Um, but I was able to register with the disabilities office here. So they basically like gave me options and ways that I could access certain foods that would make me feel safer. I also think it's really important to set up a meeting with someone who's in charge of the dining hall so you can get like a tour of it to learn how to navigate it. That was really helpful because I never felt unsafe when I was like independently picking out food, which is something that was really new for me. That was one thing that was really big. I also think that going into college, if you're going with a roommate, you should really preface the importance of like letting them know that you have food allergies, and especially if they're severe, knowing that you have an EpiPen and where it's going to be at all times. I've done that with my roommates, and they all know where my EpiPen is and what my food allergies are, and I'm like really comfortable talking to them about it. Um, and I think that's really important too, especially if you're not comfortable with having something that you're allergic to in your room. I wasn't comfortable having peanut butter in my room, so that was like a rule that me and my roommate came up with beforehand.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would tell people? So let's say we have high school seniors and those parents wonder what kinds of things should we look for when we're assessing which is the right college? Is there anything else you would recommend that they look for or ask about?
One thing that I really like about Michigan is that everything is labeled in the dining hall. So all of the foods say like, oh, this is vegan. There's like a green sticker that means um, that like that wouldn't have an I wouldn't have an issue eating it. But sometimes they have like this has nuts in it, and I think that's really helpful that they're really vocal about it. They also have EpiPens in the dining hall, and all of the employees are now trained. Um, that's a new thing too, which made me feel really comfortable eating there. So if I were to have an issue, like I could always ask someone who worked there.
I think that's a great point. Here at the University of Michigan, they did do training through the Weiser Center, training in the dining halls, and they keep stock EpiPens there. So we know that that's a place that people can get caught without their medication and or have an accidental exposure.
Yeah,
So
I had an issue like that in the dining hall. It was totally my fault. I just didn't read it properly, but I was lucky that I did have my Benadryl with me and I was able to just like fix it right away. And like I didn't draw a scene or anything. I know that's something that people are worried about, is like causing a commotion, and that's something I get really embarrassed about. I hate telling people when I'm having an allergic reaction. But I was able to handle it like by myself, and that was the first time I'd had a reaction when I was alone, and I handled it very well.
I think you had mentioned to me that you had an incident at dining out with friends. Is that correct?
Yeah,
You had a reaction.
one time I was eating out, and I also have like safe foods that I eat when I go out, and so I always order pasta because it's just easy to say what you're allergic to. But I stated that like I'm allergic to dairy, so can you like make sure there's no butter? But there was still cheese in the sauce that I didn't know about. Um,
Mm.
and obviously when I felt the allergic reaction, I was like very embarrassed to tell my friends, but it's really important to be assertive and to speak up. And my friends didn't care at all, and they were obviously like very freaked out and concerned for me. So I was like very glad that I told them, and we fixed it very quickly.
So you make a good point. I know we emphasize all the time to kids in middle school, high school, and going to college the importance of carrying medication. Do you have any tips about how you carry your medication in a way that works for you?
So I carry Benadryl, and I have an AviQ EpiPen, which is smaller, which I like. But I have one in my backpack at all times, and I always bring my backpack with me at school. And if I'm not, I always have one in like a jacket pocket too, like in a coat pocket, so you can't really tell that it's there. Um, but I never leave the house without an EpiPen.
I'm so glad that you made that point to I know our parents will be glad to hear that
Yeah.
reinforcement. So in terms of parent coaches, We know they feel this enormous responsibility to pass the torch on to their kids for independent management. What is your advice about how to facilitate those conversations so that their kids will listen?
I think that it's really important to stress to your kids about planning ahead. If you're by yourself in a situation, it's nice to know that you have a plan set for whatever it might be. So I know we've talked about this before, but I always look at a menu before I go out to eat, especially if it's with friends, so I don't have to ask a whole bunch of questions when I'm sitting there in front of a waiter. I'd rather just talk to a manager privately, and it makes it feel you feel less embarrassed. I also think that like you can also talk to teachers if they're like in school where snacks are available. My parents used to do that. I didn't even know that they would call the teachers beforehand and just say that I had food allergies and to let them know. And I also think that having friends who are aware of it is something really important when you're trying to be independent and living on your own, because there are going to be times when you might not be by yourself, but you need someone there, and having someone that you can trust and who like is aware of what's going on and who you're comfortable with, it always makes me feel better.
So, what would be your number one takeaway for younger people and their involved adults who might be watching us today from your personal experience since preschool of living with food allergies?
I think that I struggled a lot with being embarrassed about my food allergies since I have so many, but I think my number one takeaway would just be to be optimistic about it and not let your food allergies like totally consume you and control your life. Like it is totally feasible to live with food allergies and like learn to adapt to live with them, and to not let the idea of being embarrassed like set you back or make you feel down. I think that's like the one thing that's like helped me my whole life.
Yes, if they keep it to themselves, then people aren't going to be aware. They won't know that they're having a reaction, and then they're left on their own. So I think that's critical to find the words and practice those conversations so that they can speak up for themselves and let people know. I guess I would also ask the question I'm always asked by parents: is there anything you can tell parents about how to talk to kids about those sensitive issues, dating with food allergies, and at university, kids might drink, and those are things that two things that really scare the parents. And what would you say about how to navigate those conversations? And for the kids that are listening, what do they need to know?
Um, I think that at college, like obviously you're around a whole bunch of new people and you're in new settings. So you never know what people have eaten in the past. And I think that around drinking, like I'm before college feel like I never shared cups, glasses, anything. I always make sure to always have my own. And if someone is like, "Oh, can I have a sip of that or something?" I always say no. That's just been something that's like been ingrained in my head. And I think that's a really easy way to just be like, oh, like I don't share drinks. Like you don't have to say why, and people respect it, and that's totally fine. And I think with the whole dating thing, it's really important to just be honest, to say like, oh, I have a severe like nut allergy. And people are also, they're not going to say anything about it. Like they respect it. And I think one way that you can slide it in without like being upfront and like weird about it is if you're at a restaurant or at a like a meal, you when you tell the waiter that you have food allergies, after you can be like, oh, like by the way, I have food allergies, like I just wanted to let you know about it. So maybe can you not order something with like peanut sauce? And it has worked well for me every time.
That is great. Thank you so much. I know they always want to hear from somebody who's living with food allergies about what worked and how to help prepare for the next step. And we're so glad at the Weiser Center to have Haley as a student representative on our board. And so we appreciate your time today. Thanks for speaking to our families.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we're so glad to have had the opportunity to speak with Haley. Now I'm going to turn our attention to Daniel, who's going to share his perspective as an adult who lives and works in New York City. He's traveled extensively. He also works as an advocate through FAIR. Daniel, thank you for being with me today. When I asked you what you thought was the most important thing to convey to individuals with food allergies and their involved adults. You said it was how to take ownership of their food allergies, how to build collaborative relationships with their parents that will help them transition into independent management of their allergies. And I know through sharing your story, we will accomplish a great deal toward that end. Could we start with you telling the audience about your food allergies and how you came to be diagnosed?
You're muted, Dan.
Figured that would happen at least once. Thank you for having me, Kim. I am allergic to tree nuts, sesame seeds, coconut, and some antibiotics and medications.
Mhm.
And I found out I was diagnosed. Sesame, I always knew I was allergic to. Not exactly sure how, but tree nuts, I ate a bag of trail mix when I was 3, 4, something like that, on a family trip. And coconut, I actually have never had. And then medication was trial by error, just different scenarios. You take the medication, you find out you're allergic to it.
So, what are the 3 main points you want parents to leave today with regarding helping their child transition into being more independent managers of their allergies? And coupled with that, how can they speak in ways that their child will listen?
So there's a lot of ideas and thoughts I have on this topic. I'll try really hard to boil it down to 3 and not talk too extensively. So feel free to cut me off whenever. But one of the most important things that I like to tell people, or parents specifically, that I think worked really well for me is developing more of a partnership with your kid. So what I mean by that is parents very often are very concerned with protecting their child, so they take a more adversarial approach. They say, you can't do this. If you mess this up, then something really bad's going to happen. If if you forget to do this, then you're going to end up in the hospital. And I think that in taking that approach, although it comes from a meaningful place, it develops a more contentious dynamic between the kid and the parent, because the kid will start thinking, well, there's no way that you're more scared than I am, and you're telling me as if I'm not the one who's going to end up in the hospital. So I think more often it's better to set up a dynamic that's more, look, these are some challenges that I see just from thinking through on my own what might be hard for you, and I want to have a conversation about them when you have some time. So an example of that would be when I was going to college and I was put on the 3rd floor. My mother, came to me and said, I really want to push to have you put on the 1st floor, because I'm nervous that if you have a reaction in your dorm room, you're not going to be able to get downstairs in time. Let's figure out a time to call the university if that's something you want to do. Was a much better approach than saying, I'm doing this, figure it out with your roommate. There's, no ifs, ands, or buts. This will make me feel better. As just one example. So I think just remembering that the child is as scared, if not more scared, than the parent is really important just when approaching any type of angst, worry, planning for your child or with your child. So that's something I think that's really important. Another thing that I think is very important is instilling in your child and yourself being very sympathetic to people who don't understand food allergies. So the best example I can give for that is I moved into New York City with my best friend, and he and I had never really lived together, but I've known him, I met him in college, we've gotten really close, and just because of division of labor, how, what we had time for, what we like to do, my roommate was actually the one who did the food shopping, and I did some other stuff around the apartment. And it took him, I want to say, 8 different times of shopping before finally he stopped buying things I was allergic to. And it wasn't because he was trying to kill me. It was because for 25 years of this kid's life, he never read a label. So rather than getting very aggressive with him and treating him as if he was trying to kill me, I took more of an approach of, let me be very patient. Let me explain to him. Let me use some comic relief to say, like, I can't eat that, or use and be very patient with him as he got better at it. And the result of that, in my opinion, was I created actually another advocate who is more cognizant now about protecting me and very sensitive to other people with food allergies, because I took the time to work with him and not rub him the wrong way by accusing him of being insensitive or accusing him of being selfish or accusing him of manslaughter. Because at the end of the day, I knew he really was caring for me, and I found that to be a very powerful tool. I think very often people come from a place of fear, that they're so scared that they're going to accidentally eat something, and it creates, again, like that more aggressive reaction. And although I understand it, I've had much better results when you take a much more patient approach with people, understanding that there's so much other stuff that's preoccupying their time, whether it's their own medical issues, their own economic issues, their own social issues, whatever it may be, and taking the time to be patient and educate others on how they can do things to keep you safe.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that. How did it work your roommate when you went to college, was that somebody that you'd known, and how did you two work that out?
So my brother had known his brother. And then I had never met him really before we moved in together. But early on, I don't even really remember when I first told him, but early on it was, I don't know if it's luck or just my approach to it, but I've never really had an issue with someone being very receptive to my limitations. On the same page, I've also been very cognizant of how to be very respectful of that other person on me making them have to adjust their life. I'm not apologizing for my food allergies, but I also am very cognizant that, I'm asking someone to maybe not eat their favorite food or not have their favorite food in the apartment or have to go through all these steps when it's cleaning stuff or going out to dinner and making dinner plans together. So just being, again, very patient and very clear on what your expectations are from them, and not overdoing it with the concern that they aren't going to take you seriously. I am very confident in people's ability to be sympathetic. So I think if you just are very clear on saying, look, I can get really sick if this happens. It makes me really nervous having these specific foods in the dorm room. Can we just not have them? Usually has a very good response.
What would be the third point that you really want parents to leave, being able to frame their discussions with their kids?
So this one's a big one. I think that it's important to just not be naive to the real world. I think in middle school and in high school, it's really easy to control the environment. It's really easy to try and encourage the school not to have certain foods, try and encourage the school to have specific tables for people with food allergies, really encourage the environment to be controlled to make your kid very safe. But at the end of the day, when you go to college, and then even more so when you graduate college and you're working in the professional world, you can't control those things. So I think it's important to train your kid and work with your kid to understand how to manage through situations where other people are eating things that you're allergic to or are not as receptive to your accommodations or your restrictions, and better equip them to manage through those rather than trying to control the situation as long as possible, hoping that they'll never be in those situations, because it's just going to happen. And there's a million different ways it can happen. And I think that it's just really important to prepare for that early on when they're developing in middle school and high school, rather than when they're in the professional environment and they're trying to get ahead in their professional career, and then they're also really dealing with something on a social level or a personal level that they haven't really dealt with before.
Thank you. We just heard from an audience member who's asking for more information about, so her young adult has 10 allergies, and handling roommates when you are allergic to so many things. Would there be anything more you'd share about how they might handle that?
Yeah, so I've had some of these conversations before, and as someone who does not have 10, I can only give my opinion, not as much from personal experience. I think it all comes down to, and this sounds pretty corny, but like practice. And what I mean by that is practicing having these conversations with your best friends, your family members, so that you communicate what you want to communicate in the most efficient way. You don't want to overload someone with information so that they shut down, but you also don't want to inform them because you are concerned of looking, like a really high maintenance roommate. So I think it's about just understanding what's the most important things to communicate. How can I communicate it and keep the environment safe in a way that's easy? So maybe that is getting a whiteboard and writing your allergies on the whiteboard in the dorm room, or texting them to your roommate and asking him to save it in his notes, or at different moments in time explaining, like, I'm allergic to sesame, but I also, when I tell waiters and waitresses, I also include tahini, even though tahini is sesame. Being an advocate for things that people might not know you're allergic to, because there's no reason to expect that they would be able to. And just being very thoughtful with your team of people on how can I present this information in the best way, and how can I refine my ability to communicate it.
So we have a follow-up question. Do you provide information sheets? So more than verbal, you mentioned the whiteboard. Are there other tips that you have about providing things in writing, or as references, or websites maybe you point people to?
Yeah, I think that my opinion is it's always better to do it first verbally. Just because I think it can, again, seem very overwhelming if you're like, hi, nice to meet you, these are a list of all the things I'm allergic to. I think that it's important to be like, when you're meeting someone, just be like, hey, when someone's like, tell me about yourself, or when someone's like, how are you doing, or there's always a way that you can weave it into the conversation about, actually, I actually do have pretty bad food allergies. It's something I've been meaning to have a conversation with you about, because there are limitations to what I can and can't have in the dorm room. Even if you say, like, let me know when's a good time to talk about it, because maybe that person has to run to meet their parents, or maybe that person has something else to do at that moment. You don't want to have the conversation at a suboptimal time. And then as a follow-on, if you could say, I know I'm allergic to 10 different things. It's a lot to remember. I don't expect you to remember it. I actually have a card that I carry around in my wallet. I usually give it to waiters and waitresses, but I can give one to you if it's just easier to remember some things as you go food shopping, as you do stuff that I can't really eat. I think there's different ways to do it.
I think that's excellent. What I hear you saying is it's about the relationship building, and coming from a place of optimism that they want to come up with a workable plan with you. Mm-hmm. They want to make this work out. So I often hear from parents who are afraid for their child's safety out of concern, and we spoke about this a little bit. They try to modify their environments that their child is in. When they have peanut-free school or an allergen-free lunch table, there's often a need to navigate being around the allergens at school, like dairy or egg, as they are not prohibited in most schools or classrooms. You've mentioned becoming an advocate for yourself by educating yourself and others, and building relationships as the key. I think here, I'd love to know what you'd say to younger people who are very fearful about people eating things they're allergic to within their, environment, when perhaps they're allergic to dairy and kids are going to have dairy at school, or egg. What would you say your younger self, perhaps, what did you need to hear? What would you want a younger person to know?
So, honestly, it's actually easier, I think, for me to speak to young adults, college, young professional in the work world, because I don't know if it was because of my elementary school and middle school. I don't really recall ever having an instance where I felt that someone, or a kid or an adult, was knowingly not being sensitive to my allergies. I do think, though, it is, and I touched on this before, and I think it's really important. Like, everyone's got stuff they're dealing with, whether it's, other medical conditions, social conditions, economic issues, whatever it may be. And although food allergies are the most important thing to you, and the thing that's constantly on your mind, it is very safe to assume that it is not on most people's minds ever. And if you take the opportunity to say to yourself, this person's not aware of the struggles that I have, the day-to-day modifications that I have to make, the things that could increase my risk of having an allergic reaction, they're not unaware of it because they are malicious. They're unaware of it because they're preoccupied with a million other things. How do I approach the conversation from that perspective? So, and I also think that it's important to be willing to remove yourself from the situation first, then forcing someone else to change. Because you can only do so much to force someone else to change. And at the end of the day, you have to watch out for yourself. So I equate that to, if you're in a business meeting and someone is eating something you're allergic to, politely excusing yourself and asking someone else to give you the notes from that meeting. I think that does a more powerful message that also preserves your, your work environment, of saying, look, I can't really be in the room with this person. If this person's eating nuts, someone else has to do more work to give me the notes. Why don't we encourage this person to not have that in the office, rather than calling him out or making a scene or doing something like that. I think that it's just really important to approach every single situation from the perspective that this person's not trying to hurt me. They're just not informed, and how do I take my time to inform them so they know more of what it's like to live, having to eat 3 meals a day at least, and worrying every single time that something bad might happen.
So can we talk about some times that things didn't go as you hoped? And I know you've experienced a few anaphylactic reactions as an adult. You've mentioned that teens are slow to want to treat a reaction with their EpiPen. Can you share your perspective on that, and how did you work through that for yourself?
So this is a big one. So there's two parts to this. I think the first part is understanding the mentality of an anaphylactic reaction. So first and foremost, it's terrifying, it's frustrating, it's everything in between. Fortunately, I'm actually pretty good in the actual zone of having a reaction. I suffer more after. And what I mean by that is, for a period of time after I have an anaphylactic reaction, I think everything that I eat is something I'm allergic to, even if I make it myself. So that is more of a version of PTSD. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist to diagnose that, but it's a version of that, where every time I eat, I feel tingling in my throat. I think something's going to happen. And to deal with that, actually, I had to develop my own system of, after I ate something, and I expected the feeling to come, I would walk over to pour myself a cup of water. If I drank the water and it went down my throat easily, I knew I wasn't having a reaction. And that process made it much easier for me to convince myself that I was in fact not having a reaction. And I think that's really, really important, because it's very easy to get stuck in a cycle of that fear. And even though you know from every logical conclusion that what you're eating you're not allergic to, the mind is very powerful and you can convince yourself you are. So having a process to deal with that is very, very important. And then the other thing that you touched upon, which was the fear of using an EpiPen, I think is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. It's one of the most interesting things, in my opinion, because it makes no logical sense, yet I understand it so clearly, because I was once that person who was scared to use my EpiPen. The only reason why I got over it is because I was in a New York City taxi cab having an allergic reaction, and I was nervous I wasn't going to make it to the hospital. So I was at that point before giving myself an EpiPen. And the only thing that I have been able to come to understand about what is involved in that irrational fear is, it's this weird psychological event where you think that, where you know what's about to happen. You know, you have 6, 7, 8 hours in the hospital, you have multiple epinephrine shots, you have the physical reaction, and you're in denial. And you think that if you don't give yourself the EpiPen, and if you do not, if you don't give yourself the EpiPen, it's going to go away. And if giving yourself the EpiPen is acknowledging how severe this is, and it's going to cause the reaction. It's this very backwards way of thinking that if I can hold off long enough, maybe it'll just start to get better and I'll be okay. And I think in realizing that is what's going on, it better equips you to understand, I'm having a reaction, I know what's about to happen, I'm giving myself the EpiPen. Because no matter what, it's going to happen, and that's what I got to do. And thinking about it and talking about it and acknowledging that that could be a reason why you were scared to give yourself an EpiPen. It's not a pain thing. It's not a needles thing. It's not a, anything like that. It's more of a psychological block. That's just, I don't want to admit this is happening.
It makes a lot of sense. I know that's something that we worry about so much with teens, the delaying the treatment. And so parents are always asking, what can I say to help them? And so was it just being in that situation in which you felt like, okay, this is happening, I have to do it? Is there anything, I guess, leading up to that, your younger self, was there anything that would have gotten through to you or helped you to understand that before you were in that situation?
So that's a really good question, because I can't confidently answer the question, because I will not have been on the receiving end of this advice. But what I can say is, very often parents or doctors will say, use your EpiPen when you're not having a reaction, so there's nothing to be scared of. But I think that maybe that's good advice for people who are genuinely concerned about the needle, about the pain, have that set of fears. But that does nothing to acknowledge or to address the concern or the psychological block that I was talking about. So the only reason why I really became aware of it was because I just spent some time thinking about it. Like, why did I not? And I just came to this conclusion over time. And I think that the best way to address it is to, when you're not having a reaction, when you were, just in a very normal state, just think through it, just have the conversation, just say, look, for me, what I realized was, and I was very fortunate because I was fortunate in hindsight to have this experience. I had a reaction in which I waited to the last possible second to give myself an epinephrine shot. And that was by far the scariest and the worst reaction I ever had. It was the only reaction I ever had where I was actually concerned, even while I was in the hospital. I want to say a year and a half later, I ate something. I knew I had a reaction. I knew it was coming. Before I even was close to needing the EpiPen, I gave myself my epinephrine shot. That reaction, although it got to an anaphylactic state, was, brief. I was in the anaphylactic state, and my concern was very limited. It was a far and away less severe reaction. And it solidified this idea that I don't need to use my EpiPen when I need it. I use my EpiPen to prevent myself from needing it. And it became more of a mindset of, this isn't to treat me when I'm at my worst moment. It's another tool in my toolkit to prevent it from being bad. And I think from that mindset, while also acknowledging that it's happening, it's going to happen, there's no reason to expect this reaction to be different than the last 3 that I had. I'm going to need the EpiPen, I got to use it now. And having that conversation with a parent, a friend, addressing it in advance of a very high intense situation like an allergic reaction will do, in my opinion, more to help someone get over it than, when you're bored one day, go stab yourself with an EpiPen so you get over it.
Right, because it doesn't really help convey the other important piece, that acknowledgement of the reality, this thing that I've been trying to avoid, well, it's here, and I need to deal with the reality, and that this medication is here for me in these very moments.
And waiting will make it worse.
Yes.
And again, like the amount of times that I've had conversations with my parents where they just couldn't fathom why I wouldn't use the EpiPen, because they know me. They know that when I go to the doctor and I get blood tests and I get shots, like I look at the blood, I look at the needle, those things don't bother me. So they could not fathom why there was this reservation. And it's talking through the idea that it's more about the psychological frustration that it's happening. And you don't want to admit it's happening. I think that's important, and talking through it when you aren't having a reaction is key to acknowledging and getting through those emotions. And hopefully when the time does come, there's less thinking, there's more of a process-oriented approach of, I spoke about this with my mom, I spoke about this with my dad, I spoke about this with my brother. The second I feel my throat, my eyes, whatever your symptom progression is, it's the Benadryl and then the EpiPen back to back. And then I call 911, and that's that. And making it very rule-based as opposed to am I having one? Is it time yet? Is it bad enough yet? It shouldn't be about that. And I think that's really important.
So can we move to talking about how you traveled on your own? So you talked about traveling by yourself to Southeast Asia when you were 21 after graduation. Well, with friends, but without your parents. And I know that's something that I really want to hear. So I know parents want to hear, how can that happen? And I want the individuals with food allergies to recognize these are things that they can do. So how did you do that? How did that go for you?
So this is something that I credit both my parents, specifically my mom, a lot with, because there was, after a certain age, it became not about what I can and can't do. It became about how can we get this done. It almost became like, if I can convince my mother that it will be safe, I can go. And it became more of, again, that partnership between my mother and I of thinking through, all right, what are the things that we're most concerned about? Let's identify them, and how do we address them? So, just to name a few, it's like the language barrier. You can go on Google Translate, but it doesn't always work exactly. And, if you're talking about a language like, in Thai, that's very foreign, it's hard to know if it was written correctly. So for that, there was always the plan. I'd go in advance with cards, but I'd also go to the concierge of any hotel I passed and ask them to write my allergies in English, because very often concierges speak both languages. Then it would be going through the itinerary and identifying the highest risk areas. So Bangkok is much less risky as a metropolitan area than Koh Samui, a relatively isolated island. So when I was going to Koh Samui and I was packing a lot of food, if you want to travel and you want to see the world, yes, eating the cuisine is a big part of it, but at the end of the day, it's only a segment. And if I can forego eating the cuisine by packing Pop-Tarts and Nutri-Grain bars and cup noodle into my suitcase and enabling me to travel to islands and places that I would not have ever seen before, it is a no-brainer risk reward. So a lot of it was identifying places where I had to make sure that I had sufficient food. I had to make sure that there were places that sold packaged goods that I knew that I've had before. So that was another process that was involved. And then at the end of the day, it's just like calling restaurants in advance. You can plan an itinerary in which you have an idea 90% of the restaurants are going to eat at. Call them in advance. Talk through your allergies. Ask them if there's going to be stuff on the menu that you'll be able to have. There is a plan for everything, for the most part. And I think it's a really important, again, to developing that relationship with your child is, how can we get this done? Not this knee-jerk reaction of absolutely not. It's too dangerous. You can't do that. It's just, I appreciate the fear, but it's allowing the food allergies take over your life, and it's one of the only life-threatening conditions that's within your control. So giving up your control to the condition is, in my opinion, something that I would never encourage someone to do.
So were you with friends on this trip?
Yes, friends that I've known I met in college. They all knew my allergies, and it would be very surprising that anyone would be traveling to a place like Southeast Asia with people who were not willing to do whatever was necessary to make sure you were safe.
Mm-hmm. So you found that they were willing to adapt, to be flexible, and kind of let you take the lead when you needed to about where and how to do things.
Yes, 100%. But again, there's never an expectation for them to do it on their own. It's always, I have to come up with the idea, I have to do the research, I have to do the legwork, and I have to present it to them. Because I wouldn't expect that, let's say someone else is planning the whole trip, I wouldn't expect that person to be like, oh, I'm going to call every restaurant and make sure Daniel can eat there, or I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So it's making sure that you are shouldering the burden for keeping yourself safe and keeping your friends, your parents, your loved ones, whomever, informed on how they can do their part.
So it sounds like it's a combination of taking the responsibility for yourself, taking the leadership, being assertive, communicating, and just being really upfront, but also always looking for opportunities to problem solve. and
Yeah.
to plan. So we've got your mom. Is it Freddie?
Yes.
Okay. She adds the most important point I can share with the group is to work with your child to be safe but not afraid. So does that sound like your mom?
Yes. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's very easy to be afraid, and I've thought a lot about this also. I mean, from a parent's perspective, being in control of your child's eating, ages 0 through 10 or 0 through 12 or whatever that age range is, and then all of a sudden your child's like, I got this, let me do it. You're embarrassing me. Is I can imagine terrifying. It's like I don't trust my kid to do a good job of this. But you have to remember that it's him. He's the one who's going to have the reaction. He's the one who's scared. So you have to say more along the lines of, that's great. I'm excited for you to take on. I know you know how important this is. Let's talk through some things to make sure that you can handle these situations. If you're going to your friend's house, make sure that you have everything. Or if you're going to your friend's house, make sure that they plan ahead for food. And if they can't provide food that you're comfortable with, like, I'm happy to drop something off. Like, make it more about, I'm happy for you. Let's work together to think through these things. Once again, like, not doing the, if you mess up, you're going to die. If you mess up, you're going to go to the hospital. That's just, in my opinion, it comes from a place of love, but it does more harm than good in creating a lot of angst around having food allergies.
So in my role, I end up working with our patients who they're pretty averse to trying new things, going places, eating away from home. I'm always trying to, help them to see that with good skills and tools and practice, they can build their confidence and competency. But what would you say to those kids? Maybe it seems right around 10, 12, and then, into the middle school and high school years, who are limiting more and more and more, won't go to friends, won't eat away from home, no matter how much their parents want them to practice or are trying to talk to them about it. What would you say to try to help them get past that being stuck in that place of fear?
I think it goes back to the point that I was saying before of, like, there's a plan for everything. So let's take an example that you said, like, they're scared of eating out with their friends. So, their friends are planning a birthday dinner at, Joe's Pizza, wherever it may be. Go there the day before with your child and order what you plan to order, or call ahead and say, my child's planning on coming. What are things that you recommend? And then go and pick it up the day before and try it. Or, like, that's just what pops into my head. But what I would encourage everyone to do is, like, think very critically about, the first step. So the first step is never going to be flying to Southeast Asia. The first step might be eating out with your family, then eating out with your friends, then whatever. And how do you build towards that? You build towards that by, like anything else, taking baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go eat there one-on-one with my kid and make them feel comfortable. Let me go eat there, and one day and I'll tell the waiter about my allergies, and the next day my child will tell the waiter about the allergies. And then the day after that, we'll order another dish. Or, like, just, you have to invest in building their confidence and their competency in dealing with it, so that when the time comes, they're going to be able to do it on their own confidently.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question. Can you talk more about what you said? This person was really interested in the idea that this is the only chronic health condition that you can have control over how you feel. She found that very interesting. I would love to hear more about what you mean there.
Yeah, so this is, like, one of my favorite things that I say to people often struggling with the condition having an oversized effect on their life. At the end of the day, with the exception of a handful of situations like flying or where your environment is really more dependent upon other people, it is, in my opinion, one of the only life-threatening medical conditions that is within your control. If you are suffering from something like cancer or something like diabetes, there are things that you can do, but at the end of the day, there is this big factor that you cannot control: the progression, the rapidity, the medication, so on and so forth. With food allergies, like I've said before, you can do so much to keep yourself safe. You can do so much to plan ahead, whether it's, like we said, calling ahead, whether it's there are so few life situations that you can't do even with a good plan. If it's ordering food, before, when I order in food, I used to be very concerned about that. Now when I place an order, right, if it's at a restaurant I haven't been to before, I call first, I confirm that I can eat that item before placing the order. I place the order, and then I call them again, confirming they received the order and that they are aware of the allergy restrictions. I haven't had an issue with ordering in food. Like that is extremely powerful to articulate to someone who's suffering from anxiety around their allergies, because it's extremely empowering. And that's not something you can say for a lot of other things that have such a dramatic medical impact on someone's life. So like, I think that's an important point to always communicate when someone's feeling down, is like, look, this is tough. There's a ton of reasons why it's tough. There's a ton of reasons why it's scary, but there's also some reasons why it's okay that this was the hand you were dealt, because we can come up with plans and we can make it work and we can make it better for you.
So your mom wanted to note that when you went on that post-college trip, you even had dinner in a restaurant where they ate in the dark. He trusted his friends and the research to be safe. So can you talk more about the transition from college life to the working world? Any surprises, any challenges?
Yeah, so I think that like any major life change, there's always going to be unforeseen changes. So when you're going to college the first time, when you're graduating, like there's never really an age, in my opinion, where you've seen it all. So graduating from college, you're, depending on what college you went to, obviously if you went to like an NYU, it's different than if you went to the University of Michigan, but there's a much bigger environment going from Ann Arbor to New York City. So there's more restaurants that you have to be on the lookout for. The ordering in food was a bigger component of my life, but I would say the biggest transition, the biggest thing I had to learn about was managing food allergies in the corporate environment. So the reason why I think that's very important is because you're now having conversations with colleagues and bosses, which is different than having conversations with friends. There's more concerns about your professional development. There's more concerns about how you're perceived, about your value as an employee. And although those are legitimate concerns in the sense that they occur, I find them to be not as legitimate in the sense that they are often overblown. So very often you're not going to get, it's actually impossible for you to get fired because you have food allergies. It's impossible for those types of things to happen. So living in constant fear about telling your coworkers because you're scared you're going to be a burdensome employee, which is something that I've heard before, is something that you need to address with first your support system. So have a conversation with a parent, a friend, a brother saying, look, I'm really concerned about how do I articulate my food allergies to my boss. You know, we do a lot of travel, and plan for it and prepare for it and schedule a meeting and think about what you're going to say and then have that conversation. So like anything else, there's going to always be new hurdles, but I think the process of dealing with them is very consistent.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you have to be able to overcome any feeling of embarrassment or over worry about the what ifs to be able to just come up with a way to say what you need to say and to talk about it in an upfront way and make a plan.
Yeah, I mean, it always comes down to, in my opinion, you know, verbalizing the concern. I think verbalizing the concern is one of the most important things because that's how you can get to the root of what you're actually concerned about. And once you're able to verbalize it, you can come up with a plan to address it.
So I think we have just one moment left. What's the most valuable tip that you want to leave us with?
So I think there's a couple, but I'll be quick. I think one is, you know, always reiterating the point that this is a life-threatening condition, but it is controllable to an extent, and we are, you know, we can work to come up with a plan. I think developing a partnership with your child, going from if you don't do this, you're going to get really sick, to I'm excited that you're taking over this responsibility over your life. Let's make sure that we plan for these situations so that you know how to keep yourself safe. And I think third, it's, you know, find your support system, find the people that care about you the most, and learn how to regularly articulate your concerns and how to work with them to develop a plan that works for you on tackling and addressing those concerns. Because if you don't address them, they just get bigger and bigger, and they affect other parts of your life. Your anxiety bleeds into other areas. It's just not healthy, and it again is enabling your food allergies to have an outsized impact on your life than it really should.
I can't thank you enough for being with us. I think you've not only given lots of good information to people who live with food allergies, but their parents, their involved adults, and me when I'm working with them. So I really appreciate you taking the time. On behalf of the Weiser Center, we want to thank Haley and Daniel for being with us, for sharing their life experience. And I hope that you can stay with us. I'm going to lead us in a mindfulness practice as we round out. We have a couple minutes before we finish. And so please check out our past episodes on our YouTube channel. Please view them with the people that you care about who are living with food allergies. There's great, I think, positive benefit of having these messages reinforced in a really informal, conversational way. So let's take a moment and just come back to out of our thinking minds. And one of the tools that we know we need is a good way to deal with relaxation, with greeting stress. And so I welcome you just to take a moment, get comfortable in your chair, and just bring your attention to your breath. Pushing your feet into the floor, really noticing that as you sit here in your chair, connect with yourself. Close your eyes if you're comfortable. Just notice the feeling of taking a few deep breaths. Now we're going to practice the 4-7-8 breath. So breathing in on a count of 4, then we're going to hold for the count of 7, and breathing out. So I always tell the kids, breathe out like you're blowing out a birthday candle. So breathe out to the count of 8. So breathing in, taking a really deep breath, filling your abdomen with air, just allowing yourself to just focus on that feeling of the inhale to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's hold for the count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now blow out as hard as you can from your toes up to your nose, blowing out like you're blowing out a birthday candle. And remembering when you're dealing with anything that's stressful in life, we have to have ways to come back to feeling a sense of calm and ease, reminding ourselves that we're actually safe in this moment, that the thing that we're dealing with may be something that needs our attention. Maybe it needs us to focus on sometimes so that we can plan and be prepared. But when we're overthinking or rerunning things in our minds that we don't need to, because they're not actually happening in the moment, we need a way to come back and just be present with yourself right now. And tuning in when you're sitting doing schoolwork or when you're at work, just take a moment and allow yourself the chance to take a couple deep breaths, bringing your attention to how that feels. Getting yourself out of your head and just feeling and connecting with yourself in the moment. So we thank you on behalf of the Weiser Center. Thanks for making the time to be here. Thanks for the great questions. And again, Daniel and Haley, thank you for being with us. Please join us next time.